Dawn breaks over the eastern front. A low mist crawls across the frozen steppe. In the distance, engines growl. Steel beasts awaken. The year is 1944. The Red Army is pushing west, deeper into the ruins of the Reich's ambitions, and somewhere near the small Ukrainian village of Verkhnaya Olshanka, two silhouettes emerge from the smoke. One is squat, sloped, and angular as Soviet T-34, its green armor scarred from months of battle, its diesel engine coughing black smoke into the cold air. The other longer, broader, almost elegant as a German Panther, its 75-millimeter gun glinting like a spear in the sunrise. Two tanks, two worlds, one born in the factories of Kharkov, built by men and women who worked by candlelight through air raids. The other assembled in steel cathedrals of Bavaria, by engineers who believed perfection could win a war. The Panther is a hunter designed to kill at distance, to strike with surgical precision. The T-34 is a worker designed to endure, to fight in mud, snow, and chaos. And on this front, chaos rules. The Eastern Front was not a battlefield. It was a furnace. Over 30 million soldiers fought across a line stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Villages vanished overnight. Armies were swallowed whole. And in that inferno, tanks were not just machines, they were symbols of survival. When the Germans first invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, they were confident. Their panzer divisions had torn through France in weeks. But deep inside Russia, their momentum met a surprise. From the forests near Minsk to the fields around Smolensk, German tank crews began to report something unsettling. A new enemy vehicle that could shrug off 37-millimeter shells, cross swamps, and move faster than anything they had seen. It was the T-34, a tank that on paper shouldn't have existed in 1941. It combined sloped armor, wide tracks, and a powerful 76-millimeter gun features no Western army had yet mastered. For the first time, the German Wehrmacht realized it was outdesigned, but the Germans were nothing if not adaptive. By 1943, after the disaster at Stalingrad, Hitler demanded a new tank to restore German dominance. The result was the Panther, sleek, deadly, and over-engineered. It was armed with the KWK-42L70, a long-barreled 75-millimeter gun capable of piercing a T-34's armor from 2 kilometers away. It had interleaved road wheels for stability, 80 millimeters of sloped frontal armor, and an advanced fire control system. In theory, it was unstoppable. In reality, it was fragile, complex, and cursed by its own brilliance. Because for every Panther that reached the front, 3 were still being repaired. And for every T-34 destroyed, 2 more rolled out of a Soviet factory before sunset. The Panther was superior, but the T-34 was everywhere. That was the essence of the duel, not just gun against armor, but philosophy against philosophy. German perfection versus Soviet pragmatism. A tank built to dominate versus a tank built to survive. As the sun climbs higher, both machines turn their turrets. Somewhere in that gray distance, they've seen each other. Engines roar, tracks bite into the frozen soil. The duel begins. In the late 1930s, deep inside the Kharkov locomotive factory, a group of young Soviet engineers were sketching something radical. Their leader, Mikhail Koshkin, believed that the future of war would not belong to the biggest or the heaviest machines, but to those that could move the fastest, fight the longest, and be built by the thousands. Koshkin and his team studied the brutal lessons of the Spanish Civil War, where Soviet tanks like the BT and T-26 were burned alive by German and Italian anti-tank guns. Armor was too thin. Mobility meant nothing without protection. So they designed a new tank, one that would blend mobility, armor, and firepower in a single frame. They gave it sloped armor not for beauty, but for physics. Angled steel could deflect shells far beyond its thickness. They fitted it with wide tracks to glide over the deep Russian mud where German panzers would drown. And they powered it with a rugged V2 diesel engine, an engineering masterpiece that could run on dirty fuel and still survive the Siberian winter. By 1940, the prototype rolled out. It was crude, imperfect, but revolutionary. The T-34 was born, and just in time. "This tank," said one Soviet officer, "is our soldier's shield and hammer." No one yet knew how right he was. The German shock and the hunter's response. In June 1941, Operation Barbarossa unleashed 3 million German troops into the Soviet Union. At first, everything went according to plan. Panzer IIIs and IVs crushed outdated Soviet armor with ease. But then, somewhere near Mtsensk, German tankers encountered something they couldn't explain. Their 50mm shells bounced off its hull like pebbles. It moved through swamps as if on a road. And its gun, the 76.2 mm F-34, could destroy any German tank from over a kilometer away. "We had nothing equal to it," wrote General Heinz Guderian in his memoirs. "Our Panzer IV was inferior in almost every respect." The Wehrmacht's confidence cracked. Hitler demanded answers. He summoned German engineers and ordered them to design a tank that could crush the T-34 in every category. The result was Panzerkampfwagen FAF Panther. It took less than 2 years to develop, an astonishing pace for such a complex machine. Engineers combined the T-34's sloped armor concept with German precision manufacturing. They gave it a high-velocity 75mm gun, superior optics, and a suspension system smoother than any tank of its era. On paper, the Panther was the perfect predator. In practice, it was fragile, overcomplicated, and often betrayed by its own ambition. 2 doctrines, 2 futures. The T-34 was never meant to win a duel. It was meant to win a war of attrition to roll, fight, break, and be replaced before sunset. Its design allowed untrained crews to drive it, repair it, and keep it fighting with whatever parts were at hand. The Panther, on the other hand, was built like a Leica camera, precision-machined, expensive, requiring expert maintenance. Its first battlefield appearance at Kursk in 1943 was both glorious and catastrophic. Many broke down before even reaching combat, victims of engine fires and transmission failures. But when they did work, they were deadly. A single Panther could destroy multiple T-34s before being flanked or outnumbered. One German crewman called it the best tank of the war if it only ran. That single line summed up the tragedy of German engineering philosophy. The Industrial War. While German factories struggled to produce 250 Panthers a month, Soviet plants were spitting out 1,200 T-34s every month. Entire factories had been relocated beyond the Urals, working day and night. Women, teenagers, even the elderly labored with frostbitten hands, welding steel in sub-zero temperatures. Each tank was less polished than its German counterpart, but every one of them mattered. The Soviet Union wasn't just fighting for territory. It was fighting to outproduce and outlast an enemy obsessed with mechanical perfection, and that, more than any gun or engine, would decide the outcome. The Panther was born from precision, the other from desperation. But in the end, desperation builds faster. As 1943 dawned, these two machines were ready to face each other for the first time, not in theory, not on paper, but in fire, mud, and death. The duel was about to begin. When the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared over Kursk, both sides drew the same conclusion. They were fighting not just with weapons, but with ideas. The German idea was perfection. The Soviet idea was production. And between them stood the question that would decide the fate of Europe. Which matters more, the best machine or the machine that never stops coming? The anatomy of a predator. The Panther was a masterpiece of German engineering, elegant, terrifying, and tragically impractical. Its designers at MAN and Daimler-Benz obsessed over every bolt. Its Maybach HL230 engine delivered 700 horsepower, propelling 45 tons of steel at nearly 50 kilometers per hour. Its KWK-42 L70 gun could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor at a kilometer's range enough to tear through a T-34 like paper. The armor was thick 80 millimeter on the front, sloped at 55 degrees. Mathematically, it offered the protection of 140 millimeters vertical steel while saving weight. The optics were the best of the war. German gunners could hit a moving target at 1,800 meters long before the Soviets could even aim back. From a technical standpoint, the Panther was near perfect. From a wartime standpoint, it was a disaster. The Panther was like a racehorse asked to plow a field, wrote one post-war historian. Beautiful, fast, but doomed to exhaustion. Its gearbox was fragile. Its suspension was overly complex, using interleaved road wheels that clogged with mud and froze solid in winter. Its engine often overheated, setting itself on fire, and its fuel consumption was staggering. Each Panther required 15,000 man-hours to build. A T-34 required 3,000. The worker's tank. The T-34, by contrast, was ugly brilliance. Its armor plates were roughly welded, its finish crude, its ergonomics non-existent. But it worked always. It weighed only 26 tons. Its V2 diesel engine gave it long range and reliability. Its 76.2 millimeter gun, and later the 85 millimeter version, could destroy German tanks at practical combat distances under 1,000 meters. And it could be built by workers with almost no training. Soviet factories used what they had: unrefined steel, simplified designs, interchangeable parts. Every improvement was guided by one rule. Does it help us build more? By 1943, assembly lines in Nizhny Tagil and Chelyabinsk were producing hundreds of T-34s per week. Engines were tested by sound, not instruments. Tanks rolled directly from the factory floor to the front line, sometimes still smelling of paint. It wasn't beautiful, but it was unstoppable. "Quantity has a quality all its own," said Stalin, and nowhere was that more true than here. Two factories, two realities. While Soviet welders worked in unheated sheds, German engineers drafted blueprints in heated offices. While Soviet production lines moved with hammers and sweat, German lines stalled for lack of aluminum, rubber, or time. The Panther was designed to fight in ideal conditions. The T-34 was designed for reality, a reality of mud, snow, broken tracks, and frozen diesel. The difference wasn't just in steel. It was in philosophy. The Panther embodied order. The T-34 embodied chaos. But in total war, chaos was the natural state. The numbers war. By mid-1943, Germany had produced fewer than 2,000 Panthers. The Soviet Union had built over 2,000 T-34s. Even if one Panther could destroy 5 T-34s in theory, there were 10 more waiting to replace them. And the men inside those T-34s weren't just numbers. They were farmers, teachers, teenagers, many trained for just a few days. They learned to fight through instinct, through fire, through the sight of friends dying beside them. The Panther was designed for professionals. The T-34 turned civilians into soldiers, the battlefield equation. A Panther's gun was more accurate, its armor thicker, its optics sharper. But war isn't fought on paper. In real combat, what mattered most was who fired first, who moved faster, and who could keep fighting after taking a hit. And here, the T-34 had the advantage. Its turret turned faster. Its tracks gripped better in snow and mud. Its diesel engine was less likely to ignite when penetrated. The T-34 wasn't just surviving, it was adapting. By 1944, the T-34-85 gave Soviet crews a gun capable of piercing a Panther's side armor, finally bringing the duel to even ground. The Panther was still feared. But fear doesn't stop an army that builds 1,200 tanks a month. The Panther was the hunter. The T-34 was the flood. And on the Eastern Front, hunters drown fast. As the summer of 1943 turned to dust and smoke, both machines met in their most brutal confrontation yet, the largest tank battle in human history. The Battle of Kursk. July 5, 1943. The steppe near Kursk is still dark when the horizon erupts in flame. Artillery. 3,000 guns fire at once. The largest armored battle in human history has begun. For months, both sides had known it was coming. The Germans called their plan Operation Citadel, a pincer strike, to cut off the Soviet bulge around Kursk and restore the initiative lost at Stalingrad. To lead the attack, Hitler unleashed his new pride. The Panther. Nearly 200 brand-new machines from the 51st and 52nd Panzer Battalions rolled forward with the elite Grossdeutschland Division. They were meant to spearhead the southern thrust of Field Marshal Manstein's Army Group South. The first day. But even before the battle began, perfection betrayed them. As Panthers advanced toward the front, gearboxes shattered, clutches seized, engines caught fire. By noon on July 5th, almost half were disabled without ever meeting the enemy. Still, the rest pressed on, their long 75mm guns searching the ridgelines. Ahead lay fields seeded not with wheat, but with 500,000 Soviet mines. Every explosion threw dust and steel into the air. Every crater slowed the advance. Then, from beyond the haze, the counter-roar of Soviet diesel. Hundreds of T-34s from the 1st Tank Army surged forward. No finesse, no formation, just motion fast, reckless, relentless. German gunners report. They came at us in waves. We fired until the barrel glowed, and still they came. For the first time, the duel of ideas became the duel of survival. Fire and mud. At long range, the Panthers were gods. Their shells sliced through T-34s before the Soviets even closed to 800 meters. Through Zeiss optics, Soviet armor looked like glowing targets on a range. But war is never fought at the ideal distance. The battlefield collapsed into smoke, broken trees, and burning wrecks. Visibility dropped to meters. In that chaos, the advantage of the hunter vanished. T-34s darted between gullies and hedgerows, flanking from both sides. Soviet tank commanders fired on the move, sacrificing accuracy for momentum. A single hit to a Panther's flank could pierce the side plate or set the engine ablaze. Veteran Viktor Zhidkov recalled, "You aimed for the tracks or the rear. If you stopped, you died." Prokhorovka, hell on earth. On July 12th, near the small station of Prokhorovka, the climax erupted. Nearly 1,000 Soviet tanks from the 5th Guards Tank Army smashed head-on into the 2nd SS Panzer Corps Leibstandarte, Das Reich, Totenkopf. The morning sun flashed on steel as the two waves collided. There was no room to maneuver. The valley was barely 2 kilometers wide. Tanks rammed each other. Crews fired at point-blank range. One German officer wrote, "The battlefield looked like a giant factory furnace, metal and fire, screaming and smoke." Panthers and Tigers scored devastating kills, but they were too few. Each loss mattered. Each breakdown left a hole in the German line. For every Panther burning, 10 T-34s took its place. By evening, the Soviets had lost hundreds of tanks, but they still held the field. The German offensive was broken. Citadel had failed. The turning of the tide. After Kursk, Germany would never again seize the initiative on the Eastern Front. Panther crews still fought bravely at Kharkov, at Warsaw, at the Vistula River, but the tide was irreversible. Soviet factories poured out new T-34-85s, faster than the Wehrmacht could replace its losses. Even captured Panthers were sometimes turned against their makers, repainted in red stars and driven by Soviet crews. For the Germans, the Panther became a symbol of what might have been. For the Soviets, the T-34 became proof that simplicity and scale could defeat genius. Human cost. Tens of thousands died inside those machines. Steel may tell the story, but flesh paid the price. A T-34 crew's life expectancy at Kursk was less than 24 hours. German crews fared little better once fuel or spare parts ran out. They called it a battle. It was an industrial slaughter. By August, the fields of Kursk were littered with twisted hulls, Panthers with their turrets blown off, T-34s melted into the earth. Birds circled above the wrecks for weeks. The war machine had consumed its own children. Aftermath. In Berlin, Hitler called the Panther both a triumph and a disappointment. In Moscow, Stalin called the T-34 the decisive weapon of victory. Both were right, and both were wrong. The Panther had proven what German engineers could build. The T-34 had proven what a nation could endure. The duel was over. But the story was not. After the smoke. The Panther never recovered from its own brilliance. It had arrived too late, too few, and too fragile for a nation already bleeding out. Even as Germany collapsed, engineers begged to simplify its design for mass production. But the war ended before their blueprints left the drafting table. After the surrender, a few captured Panthers served briefly with France, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria. They were admired but impossible to maintain. Within a few years, most were rusting hulks, stripped for parts. The T-34, on the other hand, began a second life. It rolled west through Prague, south through the Balkans, and east into Asia. It fought in Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, and Africa. For decades, wherever war burned, a T-34 was somewhere in the smoke. Over 8,000 units were built, the most produced tank in human history. Even in the 21st century, some still sit in storage depots, engines intact, ready to start. The myth and the memory. For the West, the Panther became a fascination, a tragic marvel, the perfect tank that could not save its makers. Historians and model builders studied its lines, its gun, its precision. It became the blueprint for the Cold War era of Western tank design, inspiring the American M26 Pershing and the British Centurion. For the East, the T-34 became something more than steel. It became a myth, the machine that saved a nation, that carried a peasant's courage through fire and ice. It was carved into monuments, painted on murals, driven in parades. Children climbed its turret on Victory Day. Old men wept beside its tracks. Marshal Rokossovsky once said, "The T-34 was not the best tank of the war. It was the right tank for the war we had." That distinction made all the difference. Symbols of two worlds. The Panther symbolized how Germany fought brilliantly, desperately, against impossible odds. It showed that even in defeat, the Wehrmacht's engineers could reach technical heights unmatched by anyone else in 1943. But it also revealed the fatal flaw of that philosophy, a belief that technology alone could conquer mass and resolve. The T-34 symbolized how the Soviet Union survived through sacrifice, improvisation, and sheer endurance. Its armor bore the hammer marks of thousands of unseen workers. Its engine sang the rhythm of an entire nation at war. The duel between the two wasn't just mechanical, it was ideological. One sought dominance through design, the other through determination. Enduring lessons. Long after the last shot was fired, militaries studied their ghosts. They learned that wars are not won by the perfect weapon, but by the system that can field it, fuel it, and replace it. The Panther taught the world what not to do. Never build what you cannot maintain. Never worship complexity in a world of chaos. The T-34 taught the opposite, that reliability, simplicity, and numbers can rewrite history itself. A tank that keeps moving wins. The final reflection. Today, museum halls echo with their silence. In Kubinka, a Panther and a T-34 stand only a few meters apart, two shapes of steel, two philosophies cast in metal. Visitors walk between them, reading plaques, taking photographs. But if you stand still long enough, you can almost hear them breathe the whisper of diesel, the cough of a Maybach engine, the distant echo of Kursk beneath the summer sun. The Panther was designed to dominate the battlefield. The T-34 was designed to outlast the war. And in the end, endurance was victory. Next came silence, then peace, fragile, uneasy, and built on ashes and steel. The guns fell silent in May 1945. Berlin was a ruin of smoke and ghosts. Between its shattered walls, the wrecks of two legends lay side by side, the Soviet T-34 and the German Panther. The duel was over. But the story was not. The cost of perfection. The Panther was never meant for total war. It was a luxury product built in a starving empire. Each unit cost the equivalent of 17,000 Reichsmarks, the same as 3 Panzerfos or 5 Stug assault guns. The Germans poured rare alloys, precision optics, and time into every tank. But time was the one resource they could no longer afford. Each Panther required hundreds of skilled workers and dozens of subcontractors. Factories in Nuremberg, Kassel, and Hanover competed for parts that no one could deliver fast enough. Even when completed, the tanks often waited weeks for spare tracks, engines, or rail transport. By contrast, a single T-34 cost roughly 25,000 rubles, about a quarter of a Panther's value in materials and labor. It could be welded together in 10 days by teams of women and teenagers working 12-hour shifts. Its components were standardized. One wrench could fit nearly every bolt. And when one broke, it wasn't mourned. It was replaced. "A tank is a temporary tool," said one Soviet engineer. "The army is permanent. Factories beyond the Urals." In 1941, as the Germans closed in on Moscow, the Soviets moved entire industries east. More than 1,500 factories were dismantled and reassembled beyond the Ural Mountains, a logistical miracle. At Nizhny Tagil, Chelyabinsk, and Omsk, new industrial cities rose almost overnight. Railways brought steel from the mines of Magnitogorsk and fuel from Baku. Within months, the assembly lines were roaring again. Conditions were brutal. Temperatures below freezing, minimal food, endless shifts. Workers slept beside the machines, children fetched bolts, and every 10th tank left the line with a dedication scrawled in chalk, "For my brother at the front." Every screw, every rivet was personal. The result was a production wave the Germans could never match. By the end of 1943, the Soviet Union was producing more tanks than all Axis powers combined. For every Panther or Tiger the Wehrmacht fielded, 5 new T-34s rolled toward them. Logistics, the invisible front. The battlefield didn't just depend on firepower. It depended on who could feed the fire. The Panther needed high-octane gasoline, complex spare parts, and specialized maintenance crews. Every kilometer of advance stretched its fragile supply chain thinner. A damaged Panther often had to be abandoned. Recovery vehicles were too few, and towing cables snapped under the weight. The T-34 drank diesel, which was easier to store and less flammable. Its field repairs could be done with a hammer and welding torch. Even its tracks could be replaced by hand in an hour. When a T-34 broke down, it became part of the landscape until someone fixed it and drove it again. when a Panther broke down, it became part of the landscape forever. Manpower and training. A Panther crew needed weeks of training. Each was a specialist: loader, gunner, driver, commander, radio operator. If one died, the machine's efficiency plummeted. The Soviets could train a T-34 crew in 10 days. They had manuals written for men who had never seen an engine before. The controls were crude but intuitive, and every replacement crew could operate any tank. The result was a simple equation of survival. Germany lost crews faster than it could train them. The Soviet Union lost crews faster but could replace them instantly. War by arithmetic. By late 1944, the Soviet war machine had become a storm. Over 57,000 T-34s had been built an industrial tide that swept across Poland and into East Prussia. Every Panther destroyed was a small tragedy. Every T-34 lost was a statistic. Germany built machines. The Soviet Union built momentum. When the Red Army reached Berlin in 1945, hundreds of T-34s rolled through the Brandenburg Gate. Only a handful of Panthers remained to face them. In the end, perfection had no fuel, no spare parts, and no time left. The Panther was a marvel of engineering, but war rewards endurance, not elegance. And the T-34, battered and scarred, still moved forward.